The palace had never looked more magnificent. Silver banners bearing the Ashcroft crest fluttered above the courtyard. Crystal chandeliers lit every hallway. Thousands of guests had traveled from neighboring kingdoms to witness the royal wedding between Alpha King Cassian Ashcroft and Lady Isabella Ravenshire, daughter of the most powerful noble house in the realm. The marriage promised peace. Without it, old rivalries threatened to ignite into civil war. 2 hours before the ceremony, a scream shattered the palace. Servants rushed toward Isabella's chambers. They found her collapsed beside a dressing table, her wedding gown spread across the floor like spilled moonlight. A crystal goblet lay nearby. Dark red wine stained the carpet. The royal physician knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. His face turned pale. Poison. Panic erupted. Nobles argued in the corridor. Guards sealed the palace gates. The royal council gathered outside the room. "We must cancel the wedding." "We can't," another counselor snapped. "The ambassadors from 5 kingdoms are already inside the cathedral. If the ceremony fails, every alliance we've built will collapse." "Then what do we do?" No one had an answer. Inside the room, Isabella struggled to breathe. Her loyal maid, Miriam, held her trembling hand. With fading strength, Isabella whispered, "Don't let the kingdom burn because of me." Those were the last words she spoke before losing consciousness. Miriam stumbled into the hallway, tears streaming down her face. She searched desperately among the palace servants. Then her eyes stopped on a young seamstress carrying folded linens. Lyra. Lyra Vale looked up in surprise. She was an orphan who had spent years repairing gowns no one remembered she had sewn. Quiet, kind, invisible to nearly everyone in the palace. Miriam rushed toward her. "You have to help us." "I don't understand." "There isn't time." She grasped Lyra's shoulders. "You resemble Lady Isabella." "Only enough from a distance." Lyra stared at her. "What are you saying?" Miriam's voice broke. "If the wedding doesn't happen today, thousands could die." She pointed toward the untouched wedding dress lying inside Isabella's chamber. "I only need you to survive today." Lyra stepped back. "You want me to pretend to be the bride?" "Only until the ceremony ends. No one needs to know." Every instinct told Lyra to refuse. She was a seamstress, not a noblewoman. Certainly not someone who belonged beside an alpha king. But outside the palace windows, church bells began ringing. The ceremony would begin soon. She imagined soldiers marching, families losing sons, children growing up in another generation of war. "If there's another way," she whispered, "there isn't." With shaking hands, Miriam helped her into Isabella's wedding gown. The dress fit almost perfectly. A long royal veil covered her hair and softened the shape of her face. When Lyra looked into the mirror, she barely recognized herself. She no longer looked like the forgotten seamstress. She looked like the future queen. A palace guard knocked on the door. "The cathedral is ready." Miriam squeezed Lyra's hand. "Whatever happens." "Thank you." The great doors of the Moon Cathedral slowly opened. Thousands of guests rose to their feet. Music echoed beneath the towering stained glass ceiling. At the far end of the aisle stood Alpha King Cassian Ashcroft. Waiting for a bride he believed he knew. Lyra took her first trembling step forward. With every heartbeat, she walked closer to a man who had never seen her face, and closer to a destiny neither of them could possibly imagine. The cathedral fell silent as Lyra reached the altar. Moonlight streamed through the stained glass windows, casting silver patterns across the polished floor. Alpha King Cassian Ashcroft stood tall in ceremonial black, his royal cloak fastened with the ancient crest of House Ashcroft. From a distance, he looked every bit the fearless ruler the kingdom admired. Up close, Lyra noticed something else. His eyes missed nothing. As she stepped beside him, Cassian extended his hand. She hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before placing hers in his. The moment their skin touched, His expression changed, almost imperceptibly, but she saw it. His fingers tightened ever so slightly. His wolf stirred. This wasn't Isabella. The scent was wrong. Isabella had always worn expensive perfumes filled with rare flowers and spices. The woman beside him smelled of fresh linen, lavender, and cedar wood, the honest scent of someone who worked with her hands. He leaned closer without moving his lips. "So," his voice was barely a whisper, "who are you?" Lyra's heart pounded. She kept her eyes forward. "I wish I knew how to answer that without ruining your kingdom." His gaze remained fixed ahead as the moon priest continued the ceremony. "You're not the woman I agreed to marry." "No," she swallowed. "I'm not." Cassian expected an elaborate lie, an excuse, a desperate attempt to deceive him further. Instead, she simply whispered, "I'll disappear after today." There was no fear in her voice, only quiet acceptance, as though she had already prepared herself for whatever punishment awaited. The moon priest smiled warmly. "May the moon goddess bless this union." Around them, ambassadors from 5 rival kingdoms watched every movement. One sign of hesitation, one public accusation, one broken vow. That was all it would take to shatter years of fragile diplomacy. Cassian understood the situation instantly. The woman beside him wasn't orchestrating this. She had been placed here, likely against every instinct she possessed. His wolf, surprisingly, remained calm, not because it trusted the deception, because it trusted her. "Do you know my name?" he asked softly. "Everyone knows the Alpha King. And yours?" A brief silence followed. "Lyra." It was the first honest thing either of them had spoken since she entered the cathedral. The moon priest raised the ceremonial ribbon. "Join your hands." Cassian looked at Lyra for a single heartbeat. Then he made his decision. He closed his fingers gently around hers. "I won't expose you," he murmured. Her eyes widened beneath the veil. "Why?" "Because if I do, this kingdom burns." The ceremony continued. They repeated the sacred vows, accepted the moon's blessing, exchanged the royal rings. The cathedral erupted in applause as the moon priest declared them husband and wife. No one suspected the truth hidden beneath the bridal veil. No one realized the Alpha King had knowingly completed the ceremony with a stranger. As the guests celebrated, Cassian offered Lyra his arm. She accepted it hesitantly. Outside, flower petals drifted through the warm afternoon breeze. Crowds cheered for their new queen. Only 2 people knew the celebration rested upon a carefully guarded secret. As they entered the royal carriage together, Cassian finally looked at her directly. "Lyra." She met his eyes. "I just married a woman whose name I learned halfway through the ceremony." A faint, nervous smile touched her lips. "And I married a king I never expected to meet." Neither of them knew it yet, but the marriage born from necessity was about to become the center of a conspiracy that threatened the entire kingdom. The royal wedding banquet lasted long after sunset. Crystal chandeliers bathed the great hall in golden light. Musicians played cheerful melodies. Nobles laughed over overflowing goblets of wine. To everyone watching, the kingdom had gained its new queen. Only Lyra knew she did not belong there. She smiled when spoken to. She accepted polite congratulations. But her thoughts were fixed on one thing: leaving. As soon as the celebration ended, she intended to slip out of the palace, return the borrowed jewels, and disappear before dawn. No one would ever have to see the fake bride again. Quietly, she excused herself from the banquet. The palace corridors were nearly empty. Most servants had been assigned to the feast. Lyra searched for the servants' staircase she had used for years as a seamstress. Instead, she took a wrong turn. She found herself outside the old royal library. Voices drifted through the half-open door. She recognized one of them immediately. Lord Ravenshire, Isabella's father. Instinct told her to keep walking, but then she heard a sentence that stopped her cold. The poison worked. Her breath caught. Another voice answered, "Not exactly." Isabella drank the wine first. A long silence followed. Lord Ravenshire cursed under his breath. She was never supposed to touch that goblet. Lyra pressed herself against the wall. Every word felt impossible. A woman laughed softly. "It doesn't matter. The marriage is already legal." The fake bride served her purpose. Lyra's hands began to tremble. Fake bride, they knew. Another noble spoke. "Once everyone believes the alliance is secure, we'll remove the substitute. No witnesses, no loose ends." Her heart pounded so loudly, she feared they would hear it. She hadn't been chosen because she resembled Isabella. She had been chosen because no one would miss a common seamstress. Disposable. That had always been the plan. Lord Ravenshire lowered his voice. "And the king? The ceremonial toast during the banquet. The nightshade has already been mixed into his goblet." Lyra's blood ran cold. The poison had never been meant for Isabella. It had been prepared for Alpha King Cassian. Isabella had accidentally taken the wrong glass before the ceremony. Everything suddenly made sense. The rushed wedding, the desperate substitution. The conspirators simply adapted their plan. If Cassian died tonight, the kingdom would fall into chaos. The Ravenshire family could seize control, while blaming the tragedy on fate. A floorboard creaked beneath Lyra's foot. Silence filled the library. "Someone's outside." The door burst open. 2 guards loyal to Lord Ravenshire lunged into the corridor. "There she is!" Lyra ran. She knew these hallways better than anyone. She had spent years repairing curtains, measuring windows, and delivering finished gowns. She darted through narrow servant passages, down hidden staircases, past abandoned storage rooms. The guards shouted behind her, "Don't let her reach the banquet!" She pushed open a concealed panel behind an old tapestry and emerged near the grand staircase. Music echoed from the ballroom below. Cassian would soon receive the ceremonial wine. She had only moments left. Ignoring the fear burning in her chest, Lyra gathered her skirts and raced toward the banquet hall. If she arrived too late, the man she barely knew would be dead before the final toast. The grand banquet hall echoed with music and laughter. Hundreds of nobles raised crystal goblets as servants moved gracefully between the tables. At the center of the room, Alpha King Cassian stood beside the royal throne. Across from him, the master of ceremonies lifted an ornate silver tray. Upon it rested 2 crystal goblets. "The ceremonial toast," he announced. "The first drink shared by their majesties." Cassian reached for one of the goblets. At that exact moment, the great doors burst open. "Your Majesty!" Every head turned. Lyra ran into the hall, her veil gone, her borrowed gown stained with dust from the hidden corridors. 2 armed men chased after her. "Stop her!" one shouted. "She's trying to attack the king!" The royal guards immediately stepped between Lyra and the throne. She didn't stop. She couldn't. Cassian had already lifted the goblet toward his lips. Without thinking, Lyra lunged forward. Her hand struck the crystal. The goblet flew from Cassian's grasp. It crashed against the marble floor. Dark red wine splashed across the white stone. The hall fell into stunned silence. Then chaos erupted. "Seize her! Protect the king!" Guards surrounded Lyra, forcing her to her knees. One captain drew his sword. "You dare assault his majesty?" Lyra struggled to catch her breath. The wine? She looked desperately at Cassian. "Don't let anyone drink it." Lord Ravenshire stepped forward with perfect outrage. "This proves she's an impostor. I warned everyone she couldn't be trusted. Execute her before she harms the king again." Several nobles shouted in agreement. Cassian remained silent. His golden eyes never left Lyra. She wasn't pleading for mercy. She wasn't trying to explain herself. She looked only at the shattered wine spreading across the floor. Then the palace physician pushed through the crowd. "Wait." He knelt beside the broken glass. Carefully, He dipped a silver testing needle into the spilled wine. Within seconds, the polished metal turned black. Gasps echoed through the hall. The physician slowly stood. Deadly nightshade. His voice trembled. One swallow would have killed the Alpha King within minutes. The room became deathly quiet. Cassian's gaze shifted toward Lord Ravenshire. The noble's confident expression had vanished. Royal guards immediately surrounded Isabella's family. "No one leaves this hall," Cassian ordered. His voice was calm, but beneath that calm lived unmistakable fury. Captain Rowan searched Lord Ravenshire and discovered a small vial hidden inside his sleeve. The physician examined it. The same poison. One by one, the conspirators were arrested. Their carefully woven plan unraveled before the entire kingdom. Only after the guards led them away did Cassian walk toward Lyra. She was still kneeling where they had forced her down. He dismissed the guards with a single gesture. "Release her." They obeyed immediately. Lyra rose slowly. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I had no other way to stop you." Cassian looked at the frightened young woman standing before him. She had entered the palace wearing another woman's wedding dress. She had every reason to run when she discovered the conspiracy. Instead, she had risked being executed to save a man she barely knew. Twice. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Cassian smiled faintly. Not as a king, as a grateful man. He extended his hand. "What is your real name?" She placed her trembling hand in his. "Lyra." He nodded. "Then thank you, Lyra, for giving me another sunrise." 3 days after the attempted assassination, the royal council assembled in the throne room. The atmosphere was heavy. The Ravenshire family had been imprisoned. The conspiracy had been exposed. Yet one question remained. What should become of the king's marriage? Councillor Marcus stepped forward. "Your Majesty, the law is clear. The marriage was founded on deception. It should be annulled immediately." Several nobles nodded. The bride was never Lady Isabella. The vows cannot stand. The kingdom needs a proper queen. Lyra stood quietly near the foot of the throne. She wore a simple gray dress she had sewn herself. The borrowed jewels had been returned. The royal veil was gone. For the first time since entering the palace, she looked like herself. She bowed her head. "I agree." Every eye turned toward her. "I never intended to remain here. I only wanted to prevent a war." She looked at Cassian. The marriage served its purpose. "I'll leave tonight." A silence settled over the chamber. Then Cassian rose from the throne. "No." The single word echoed through the hall. Councillor Marcus frowned. "Your Majesty?" Cassian descended the marble steps until he stood beside Lyra. "You say this marriage was built on deception. You're right." He looked around the chamber. "But tell me, who deceived me?" No one answered. "Was it this woman?" He gestured toward Lyra. "She admitted the truth the moment I questioned her. She expected punishment. She never asked for a crown." His gaze swept across the council. "The people who lied to me now sit in prison. The woman standing beside me is the only one in this palace who never chose deceit." The room fell quiet. Cassian turned toward Lyra. "You saved my life. You protected this kingdom. You owe no apology." Lyra smiled sadly. "That doesn't mean I should become queen." The words surprised everyone. Cassian searched her face. "Why?" She took a slow breath. "Because I don't want a throne that belongs to someone else. I don't want people whispering that I became queen because another woman fell." Her voice remained gentle but steady. "I want to earn whatever life I live." The sentence lingered in the throne room long after she finished speaking. Even the oldest counselors lowered their eyes. Cassian had faced generals without fear. He had negotiated with rival kings. Yet no speech had moved him quite like those simple words. For the first time, he understood what true dignity looked like. It wasn't found in noble blood. It wasn't found in royal titles. It was found in a woman who could have accepted everything she had never dreamed of, and still chose integrity instead. Lyra bowed once more. If you'll allow it, I'll return to the seamstress workshop. I can continue serving the palace there. Cassian looked at her for a long moment, then he smiled. You may return to the workshop. She seemed relieved, but not because you're leaving. She looked up in confusion. Cassian's eyes softened. You've reminded me that respect cannot be ordered. It must be earned. He offered her a small, genuine smile. So it seems, I'll have to earn the heart of the woman who is already my wife. For the first time since they met, Lyra laughed. It was quiet, brief, but wonderfully real. The entire kingdom laughed. Never before had an alpha king announced that he intended to court his own wife. The story spread from palace halls to distant mountain villages. Some called it romantic. Others called it ridiculous. Cassian ignored them all. The very next evening, he walked to the palace seamstress workshop, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a book. Not a rare royal manuscript. Not an expensive treasure. Just a well-loved collection of fairy tales. Lyra looked at it in surprise. You remembered. You mentioned you never learned to read properly, because you started working as a child. I thought we could fix that. From then on, every evening became their own quiet tradition. Sometimes Cassian brought books. Sometimes he brought wildflowers he had picked during his morning rides through the royal forests. Sometimes he brought nothing at all except his company. One rainy afternoon, he found Lyra mending winter coats for children at the royal orphanage. Without a word, he rolled up the sleeves of his royal shirt and sat beside her. She looked up from her work. Your Majesty, you'll ruin your clothes. They're only clothes. He picked up a needle. Show me. She blinked. You've never sewn before. I've also never been married before. I seem to be learning many things. She laughed softly and demonstrated the first stitch. His was crooked. The second looked even worse. By the fifth attempt, both of them were laughing. The children gathered around the table, cheering every time the king managed a straight seam. For the first time in years, the orphanage echoed with carefree joy. Weeks became months. Whenever Cassian visited a village, he invited Lyra to join him. Together they repaired broken cottages after storms. They helped harvest wheat before winter. They carried food to elderly wolves who had no family left. The people stopped seeing a ruthless alpha king. They saw a man who never considered any task beneath him. One evening, after delivering blankets to a mountain village, Lyra and Cassian sat beside a quiet lake. The water reflected a sky full of stars. Lyra broke the silence. When people first spoke about you, I was afraid. Cassian smiled faintly. I know. They called you cold. They said your heart belonged only to duty. And now? She looked at him. I think they only knew the king. They never took time to know the man. Cassian turned toward the water. For years, I thought a ruler had to stand apart. My father believed distance inspired respect. Lyra shook her head gently. Kindness inspires something stronger. What? Loyalty. He considered her answer for a long moment. I think you're right. A cool breeze drifted across the lake. Neither of them hurried to leave. The silence between them no longer felt uncertain. It felt comfortable, safe. As the palace lights appeared in the distance, Lyra realized something had quietly changed. She no longer looked forward only to tomorrow's work. She looked forward to tomorrow evening, to another book, another conversation, another ordinary moment shared with the man who had never demanded her affection, only earned it. And for the first time since wearing another woman's wedding dress, Lyra allowed herself to hope that the marriage born from necessity might one day become the love story they would choose together. 1 year after the royal wedding that had nearly ended in tragedy, the bells of the Moon Cathedral rang once again. This time, there were no whispers, no political bargains, no hidden conspiracies, only anticipation. The pews filled with villagers, nobles, soldiers, and children from the royal orphanage, where Lyra had spent so many afternoons sewing tiny winter coats. The entire kingdom had been invited, not to witness an alliance, but to celebrate a promise. Cassian stood at the altar wearing the same black ceremonial coat he had worn a year before. In his hands rested a single parchment, the original royal marriage certificate, the document that declared he and Lyra husband and wife. The moon priest smiled. "Your Majesty, shall we begin?" Cassian shook his head gently. "Not yet." He turned toward the crowd. "A year ago, this cathedral witnessed a marriage born from desperation. It protected our kingdom, but it did not honor the hearts of the two people standing at this altar." The hall fell silent. Lyra walked slowly toward him, dressed in a gown she had designed and sewn herself. It wasn't covered in jewels. It wasn't made to impress noble families. It was simple, elegant, entirely her own. Cassian waited until she stood beside him. Then he lifted the old marriage certificate. This paper was signed because duty demanded it. He looked into Lyra's eyes. "I've kept it to remind myself that surviving together isn't the same as choosing each other." With steady hands, he tore the document cleanly in half. A gasp swept through the cathedral. The pieces drifted gently to the marble floor. Cassian smiled. "I don't want the marriage created by desperation. I want the one created by choice." He reached into his coat and removed a small velvet box. Then, before kings, nobles, and commoners alike, Alpha King Cassian Ashcroft lowered himself onto one knee, not as a ruler, as a man. "Lyra Vale." His voice was warm with quiet certainty. "Will you marry me for the very first time?" Tears shimmered in Lyra's eyes. She laughed softly through them. "I thought I already had." Cassian's smile widened. "You did. But today, I'm finally asking." The moon priest handed him 2 new wedding bands, with simple silver circles without royal crests. Lyra accepted one. Instead of waiting for Cassian to place it on her finger, she slipped it onto her own hand. Then she gently placed his ring on his. "I choose you," she whispered, "not because of a crown, not because of fate, but because every day this past year, you've chosen me." The cathedral erupted into applause. Children cheered. Soldiers pounded their fists against their chests. Even seasoned nobles wiped tears from their eyes. When the moon priest pronounced them husband and wife, the words carried an entirely different meaning. Their first marriage had saved a kingdom. This one healed 2 hearts. As they walked hand in hand down the cathedral aisle, flower petals floated through the open doors. No veils hid the truth. No secrets stood between them. Only 2 people who had discovered that the strongest vows are not spoken out of necessity, but out of love freely and joyfully given. 5 years after their second wedding, the Ashcroft kingdom had become almost unrecognizable. The grand palace still stood beneath the same silver banners. The royal throne remained carved from ancient oak, but the people no longer believed greatness belonged only to those born into noble blood. Queen Lyra had changed that. She never forgot the years when she had been invisible. She remembered stitching gowns she could never wear, walking palace corridors where no one knew her name, watching noble children study while orphan children learned only how to survive. She refused to let another generation grow up believing birth determined worth. Her first royal decree established the House of New Beginnings. Every orphan in the kingdom would receive food, education, and training in a craft of their choosing. Some became healers, some became blacksmiths, others became artists, teachers, and scholars. No child would be told that their future ended where their family history began. The kingdom embraced the change. Then Lyra announced another reform. Royal positions would no longer belong exclusively to nobles. Every applicant would be judged by ability, honesty, and service. The first commoner appointed to the royal treasury had once been a baker's daughter. The new captain of the palace library had grown up as a shepherd. A young stable boy eventually became one of the king's most trusted advisors after years of faithful service. At first, many nobles protested. "They lack the proper bloodlines," Cassian answered with a calm smile. "I've learned that character keeps a kingdom standing far longer than ancestry." The complaints faded. The results spoke louder than tradition ever could. One afternoon, during a gathering of provincial leaders, Cassian addressed the court. He looked toward Lyra before speaking. "When history remembers my reign, I hope it remembers one thing." The hall grew quiet. "It was my queen who taught this kingdom that greatness can be stitched together from ordinary lives." Lyra laughed softly. "You give me too much credit." He shook his head. "No. You reminded us that crowns do not create noble hearts. They simply reveal them." News of the queen's kindness spread beyond the kingdom's borders. Travelers came to see the palace, where an orphan seamstress had become queen. Many expected marble halls filled with distant royalty. Instead, they found Lyra sitting with apprentices in sewing rooms, reading stories to children, sharing meals with palace staff. She never forgot where she came from. The people gave her a title no council had ever approved. No royal decree had created it. It rose naturally from grateful hearts. They called her the people's queen, not because she ruled over them, because she walked among them. And whenever visitors asked how such an ordinary woman had become one of the greatest queens in the kingdom's history, the palace guides always smiled. It wasn't the wedding dress that changed her life. It was the courage she showed after putting it on. Many years passed. King Cassian's dark hair slowly turned silver. Queen Lyra's hands, once rough from years of sewing, now carried the gentle lines of a life spent serving others. The Ashcroft kingdom flourished. Wars had become rare. Children from orphanages graduated as healers, architects, and royal advisors. No one questioned whether greatness belonged only to the nobly born anymore. The answer surrounded them every day. On the anniversary of the royal wedding, the palace opened its Hall of History to visitors from across the realm. The hall displayed ancient crowns, ceremonial swords, royal scrolls signed by generations of kings. Yet one object drew more attention than all the others: a simple white wedding veil. It hung inside a glass case at the center of the room. No jewels decorated it. No golden thread marked it as royal. A young girl studying the display tugged gently on her mother's sleeve. "Why is that old veil here?" Before her mother could answer, Queen Lyra approached with King Cassian beside her. She smiled warmly at the child. "Because that veil reminds me that appearances can begin a story, but only character can finish one." The little girl tilted her head. "Were you wearing it?" Lyra nodded. "I was, but it wasn't really mine." She briefly told the children how she had entered the palace believing she would disappear before sunrise. How fear had nearly kept her silent. How choosing to protect another life had changed her own forever. She never mentioned crowns. She never spoke about becoming queen. Instead, she ended with a simple truth. The most important choices we make are often the ones no one expects us to make. The children listened in complete silence. Cassian then stepped toward the glass case. He pulled away a silk cloth covering a polished stone beneath the veil. Freshly carved words caught the afternoon light. "A throne should never belong to the person born for it." Below it appeared a second line. "It should belong to the person willing to protect others long before anyone offers them a crown." The visitors applauded. Many stood quietly reading the inscription a second time. Later that evening, Lyra and Cassian walked through the palace gardens. The same moon that had watched a frightened seamstress step into another woman's wedding dress now shone peacefully above them. Cassian looked at her with the same gratitude he had felt the night she knocked the poisoned goblet from his hand. "Do you ever wish that first wedding had never happened?" Lyra smiled. "If it hadn't, I would never have learned that love isn't found in perfect beginnings." She slipped her hand into his. It's built by the choices people make after everything goes wrong. History remembered the royal wedding that nearly became an assassination. But the kingdom remembered something far greater. A common seamstress who entered the palace pretending to be another woman's bride. She expected to vanish before dawn. Instead, she proved that true royalty is never sewn into a wedding gown. It is stitched into a person's character, one selfless choice at a time.